The big question of this segment is, what is the relationship between historical and scientific explanation? So what are the differences between history and science? What kind of differences are there between scientific explanations and historical explanations? Are there any scientific disciplines that use historical methodology? So can we talk about historical science? And what would a grand historical narrative of scientific explanation look like? And is that something that the Big History Project can really pull off? Is history an art or a science? Well, it has elements of both, because historians obviously appeal to evidence. They're interested in things like documents and artifacts and so on. So of course, in that sense, history is empirical. But historical explanations are also narrative explanations. They explain how some event came about by describing the sequence of events that led to it. Okay, so now, what kind of differences are there between historical and scientific explanations? Well, there are differences between scientific and historical explanations. The sciences, for example, involve experimentation, but they also produce theoretical models that include laws or generalizations concerning the nature and behavior of physical phenomena. So that idea of modeling reality and testing the model by controlled experiment is crucial to scientific reasoning and explanation. So another kind of difference that's important is that sciences also involve making predictions and testing them. So in that sense, history isn't precisely a predictive science. Of course, it's really concerned with the past. So one might ask, well, look, don't historians make predictions about the future based on past events? Well, yeah, they do, but not in the controlled experimental sense of the sciences. However, I'm not trying to force a complete discontinuity between history and science here, because some sciences are historical. And it's clear that some sciences involve historical explanations, biology, and particularly evolutionary biology, being an obvious example. So evolutionary explanations are historical because they show us how, for example, a trait, a biological trait, gradually evolved over time. So take as an example the gradual evolution of the complex mechanism that is the eye. The eye has evolved through the action of natural selection, resulting in an exquisitely adapted mechanism. So evolutionary explanations as historical explanations are important, and it's important that we get them right, so they need to avoid being just so stories. So what I mean by just so stories is the need to avoid merely plausible stories about how a trait evolved. Famously, two biologists, Stephen Gould and Richard Lewontin, warned against falling prey to just so stories. Fortunately, biologists are able to make use of mechanisms in their explanation, of variation, selection, and inheritance, which makes their job easier. And philosophers of biology, for example, are really interested in these kind of questions, questions concerning how do biologists make reference to mechanisms in their explanations of adaptation, for example. So here I think is an important question, which will come up in this course in different ways, is whether the kind of mechanical explanations used in the physical sciences can be repeated in the social sciences. So for example, are there social mechanisms that would help explain economic, political, and historical phenomena? Well, if there are, then there appears to be an interesting continuity between explanation in the natural and the social sciences. And philosophers of science and social science are really interested in these questions. They're interested in continuities and discontinuities in methodology between the natural and the social sciences. So one of the final things I wanted to talk about was just this idea of big history as a grand narrative. Now, why do I think it's a grand narrative? Well, because it brings together strands of historical explanation in different disciplines. In that sense, it's interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary, and it draws on work in quite diverse disciplines, for example, cosmology, paleontology, anthropology, biology, history, economics, and indeed philosophy. So in one sense, it provides a unifying narrative of these various strands that helps us to make sense of how physical and social complexity has emerged over time.